Well, hello and welcome to today's presentation. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I am Rachel Forrester, President of the Board of the League of Women Voters of the Mount Baldy area. Before we begin today, I have a few announcements. We are currently recruiting observers to join the League of Women Voters Mount Baldy Area Observer Corps. Observers are the eyes and ears of the League, and they keep us informed across our service area. If you are interested in serving as an observer or just want more information, please reach out to us through our website, League of Women Voters, mountbaldyarea.org. Curious about the state of redistricting in California? Well, the California Citizens Redistricting Commission has released their final report, and it is available at wedrawthelines.ca.gov. The report is long and technical. Never fear, your league is here for you and working on programming to help inform you of what lies ahead for our region and California. Please look forward to future events on redistricting. Every January, the Los Angeles County Homeless Services Authority conducts a point-in-time count of those experiencing homelessness. This data allows for the equitable distribution of federal, state, and county funding for homeless services and is especially important in the East San Gabriel Valley, where rates of homelessness has been rising at rates proportionally greater than other parts of LA County. The count was canceled last year and has been postponed until February of this year due to the Omicron outbreak. I have participated in this before, and I look forward to doing it this year. Information about participating in the Claremont count can be found on the Claremont website. To find out how you can participate in other communities, you can go to LASA, LASA.org. I really encourage everybody to participate in this. It's not a hard thing to do. Most people participate inside their car without ever having to go out. You go out in teams. It's really important that we get volunteers and that this be an accurate count. Before I introduce our presenters for today, a bit of housekeeping. Today's presentation is being recorded and it will be made available on our YouTube channel. As always, that can be accessed through a link on our website, lwvmountbaldyarea.org. There will be a Q&A session following the presentation. You may enter your questions in the Q&A at any point during the presentation, and I will ask them of our presenters afterwards. At the end, you can also use the raised hand function to ask your questions live. With that, we can get to the main event. Let's get our presenters back on screen. All right, Terry, Lissa, and Arlene. I believe Arlene is going to start us off.
Thank you, Rachel. And hello, League of Women Voters and Friends. I'm Arlene Andrew, a member of the board of the Claremont Wildlands Conservancy. Today, board member Lissa Peterson, board president Terry Grill, and I are going to tell you the story of the Claremont Hills Wilderness Park. The agenda, I'll be talking about the history. Lissa will talk about the expansion of the Wilderness Park and the master plan, and Terry will be talking about the future. Up until 1997, except for a 40-acre parcel called Sycamore Canyon, undeveloped hillside land north of the flatlands of Claremont was in private hands. Today, 2,500 out of 3,100 undeveloped hillside acres are within the boundaries of the park. How did this change come about? And this is the story of how Claremont gradually expanded north to the hillsides and how the Wilderness Park evolved. In the beginning, abundant hillside plants, trees, animals, and water helped indigenous populations flourish before colonists came and displaced them. In the late 19th century, with the arrival of the railroad and the establishment of colleges and towns in the area, local students and residents started venturing up to the lovely hillsides. In the early 20th century, the C.C. Johnson family, who had purchased hillside land, picnicked and hiked there. And later, Claremont residents planted flowers and trees on what became permanently known as Johnson's pasture. The nearby property owned by the Gale family flourished as an Angora goat ranch. And here you'll see pictures of picnickers and then the goat ranch. Claremont in the late 19th century and early 20th century was confined to the town site around the railroad depot and gradually grew north to Foothill Boulevard, which is in the lower right-hand corner of the photo. And it came to Claremont in 1931. Then housing in the hillsides was initiated in 1925 by H.H. Garner, who developed the Padua Hills neighborhood, intended to be an elegant community fostering artists and not, in Garner's words, a honky-tonk place. In 1930, he and his wife, Bess Garner, established the Padua Hills Theater that you see here. But the Padua Hills neighborhood to this day has not been annexed to the city of Claremont. As Claremont grew, the flatlands between the town's center and the hills were planted with vast acres of citrus trees, as you can see here. By the 1950s, development was creeping north and the city was growing, but the hillsides remained unincorporated county land. The city's movers and shakers saw a need to establish rules to steer future growth in a manner acceptable to its citizens. And so, in 1956, adopted a general plan. Now required by state law, general plans are meant to encapsulate a city's vision for its future and to establish foundational policies and programs covering topics such as housing, open space, circulation, and many more. State law requires a city's zoning and other ordinances to be consistent with the general plan. Several large hillside parcels were annexed to the city in the mid-1960s, and a dense hillside development named Claraboya, and you can see it, the map of it here, shocked Claremont residents into the realization that the hillsides could be covered with houses if something wasn't done to control development. Johnson's pasture adjacent to Claraboya was to be Claraboya Phase 2. Later owners, American Savings and Loan, in the mid-1970s, attempted unsuccessfully to receive approval to develop the property with 256 houses at a time when the zoning was 2 dwelling units per acre. According to city historian Judy Wright, the hillsides could ultimately been developed with almost 7,000 homes based on the zoning in the 1970s. The first glimmer of an idea for parkland in the hillsides may have come about when the Claraboya developers deeded to the city 40 acres of hillside land, Sycamore Canyon, you can see it where the arrow is, on the north side of Thompson Creek Channel in exchange for some higher density. The League of Women Voters played a pivotal role in moving the city to adopt regulations that would ultimately preserve hillside land. Their 1977 study, Claremont Hillside Development, you see the cover here, looked at issues such as fire, water, seismic danger, and the costs and benefits of hillside development. It contained recommendations for the Planning Commission and Council to consider, citing league fashion pros and cons of each, pointing out that although housing generated tax money, the costs of providing services, police, fire, street cleaning, trash collection, and so forth, especially in a hillside area, would exceed tax revenues. Consequently, in 1977, the city adopted a natural environment element of the general plan, laying the foundation for a hillside zoning ordinance that could protect large portions of hillside land. League members Judy Wright and Diane Ring played an important role then and in future years. Without the League's leadership, the Claremont Hills Wilderness Park might never have come into being. The League's work, and sorry about the fuzzy picture, the League's work stimulated creation in the late 1970s of a task force made up of interested citizens, realtors, members of local organizations, commissioners, and council members. They tried to balance environmental concerns, property owners' rights, and community values. At first, they considered a slope density zoning that would allow more houses on flatter land and fewer houses on steeper, more remote land. But this zoning would have resulted in roads cutting through the hills and an enormous amount of cut and fill grading, and that's supposed to be what you're seeing in the photo, to make flat pads for houses and streets. The city then hired a planning consultant, George Mader, known for skill in preserving hillside environments while allowing for limited housing developments, and a San Francisco attorney, Antonio Rossman, to work with the task force. Rossman was able to make a convincing and legally sound case for adapting a concept conceived for historic building preservation to land preservation. The result was adoption in 1981 of a brilliant hillside ordinance that contains a transfer of development credit scheme that allows houses to be built in certain cluster areas that are flatter and closer to roads and utilities, but also allows owners of land not in cluster areas to have the potential for some economic use of their land. Cities cannot simply zone away the value of a piece of land. The ordinance, unsuccessfully fought by several opponents, was based on a concept that originated in New York City to preserve the iconic Grand Central Station, which sat on land zoned for a high-rise building. Developers wanted to build a tall new building on the site. Preservationists came up with the ingenious idea of having Grand Central sell its air rights, the right to build a very tall building, to a property elsewhere in Manhattan, enabling the second owner to build a taller skyscraper than was originally allowed under its zoning, as you can see in this illustration. The concept was challenged. The case went to the Supreme Court, and the validity of the transfer concept was established. With Rossman's guidance, Claremont adopted the concept, but referred to it as a transfer of development credit scheme to avoid implying that remote steep land could actually be developed with housing. Consultant George Mader studied every privately owned undeveloped hillside parcel and, using topographic maps, estimated the number of houses that could, in theory, but not in actuality, be built based on a slope density formula. The steeper the slopes and the further from roads and utilities, the fewer the number of housing units or credits were assigned to that parcel. And housing could only be built in the flatter, less remote cluster areas. And this map, all those little yellow tags that are pretty big in this photo, show the acreage and the number of dwelling units, i.e. cluster credits that were assigned to all these different parcels. The owner of a cluster area, after buying credits, could then build more houses, assuming that the development met general plan policies, environmental quality provisions, and all other zoning requirements. The ultimate goal was for the credits from donor parcels to be legally and permanently extinguished and for the parcels to become open space forever. Here's a simple example of a parcel that is requesting 2 credits to build a total of 40 houses. On the left, they have 38, and there are a couple of neighboring parcels, one with 6, one with 5. The yellow parcel has presumably would buy two credits from the neighbor, and so the neighbor now has 4 credits, and the developer has 40 credits in order to build in a cluster 40 housing units. The ordinance, however, has only been used once, and that was to create the neighborhood known as Stone Creek. which is located along Baldy Road. Land owned by the Garner family, about 1,400 acres, along with the Padua Theater, was bequeathed to Pomona College by alumnus H.H. Garner in 1980. Development credits were transferred to the cluster from the 1,200 acres that became the beginning of the Wilderness Park. The cluster's increase in density increased the value of the cluster, which Pomona College then was able to sell to a developer who built the houses you see north of Baldy Road at Padua Avenue. That's the purple is that cluster area. And now Lissa will go into detail about the negotiations with Pomona College, the beginning of the Wilderness Park, and later acquisitions. So, thanks.
Thanks, Arlene. I just want to start by showing you several pictures of the Claremont Wilderness Park so that you can see why we love it so much and why we want to save it and expand it. Okay, and now let's get down to business. This is an aerial view that shows the urban wildland interface along Claremont and Laverne, along our northern borders of our cities. And you can see a lot of suburban sprawl over there on the right and on the left, and on the right you can see Baldy Road going up and the Claremont area going with it. The arrows pointing at Claraboya. As Arlene said, all of the foothills were in private hands in 1974, and all but 40 acres were in private hands in 1994. So suburban sprawl could have been all over the hillsides, but instead, here's what we have today. And the outlines here are parcels that are added to the park. So don't worry about the outlines, just look at the color of them. The green area is all Claremont Hills Wilderness Park today. The blue area is county land. It's Marshall Canyon Regional Park. And the red area down on the left is the Clara Oaks area that we hope to add to Claremont's Wilderness Park. And Terry will be talking about that a little bit later. To get you oriented, if you're just trying to figure out where you are, right next to the red area on the right, you will see Claraboya going up into the foothills, and that straight line coming down from it, that's Mountain Avenue. And the main entrance to the Wilderness Park, if you look at those straight lines, those are streets going up. There's Mountain Avenue. To the right of it is Indian Hill, and to the right of that is Mills. And if you go up to the top of Mills, that's where you enter that's the main entrance to the Claremont's Wilderness Park today. Okay, our vision is to have parkland across, as Arlene said, all of Claremont's foothills. And you can see that there are some blank areas in there that still need to be filled in. And when you're looking at the green, and those are areas where private owners still have the land, and we're hoping eventually to gain it. We also want to continue extending the wildland corridor to the west beyond Marshall Canyon, as far west actually as Monrovia, by connecting up all of the separate little open spaces along the way on the face of the San Gabriel foothills. So gradually that's becoming reality, but we're not there yet. Okay, this chart, and don't worry about learning everything on it. This chart, if you look across the top, is showing you all the 9 acquisitions of parcels that have made up the Claremont Wilderness Park. It tells you the year, the acquisition name, the number of acres that were added, the funding source, and the amount. Since 1975 with Sycamore Canyon, then there was a big gap until 1996. And then we've been acquiring parcels between 1996 and 2020 so far. There have been donations, but much of the funding, as Arlene said, is from state grants. And you can see in the fourth column under funding source, state grant, state grant, state grant. And there's been some county money as well. So only one parcel is from mostly local funding, and that's Johnson's Pasture, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Okay, this chart, and I'm just going to go through these acquisitions, but I'll kind of group them together. So it's not going to be 9, it's going to be more like 6. This chart makes it look like there was a really neat logical progression from the vision of the wilderness park, that everybody had that vision and it became reality over time. But that's really not how it happened. The vision emerged over many years. It didn't start out with people envisioning a park because the land was all private. It just happened in fits and starts. As Arlene said, Sycamore Canyon along the eastern edge of Claraboya became a park in 1975. And the city council created this 40-acre park, but those city council members expected the rest of the foothills would be developed. They made no plans for more parkland in the future. In 1981, the city of Claremont, as Arlene said, adopted the hillside ordinance with development credits. And that was a really major event because it opened minds up to the vision of Claremont's hillsides remaining green, because there would be pockets of development, but that would leave large swaths of natural open space. And the hillsides would look green when you look at them from the city below. With the ordinance in place, the next significant event was the opening of the original Wilderness Park in 1997. And it was 1,220 acres. It was really big. Next slide, please. Yeah. This map, it's a 2001 map, and it shows you the original park. The striped parcels make up the original park. And the designated cluster areas that Arlene was talking about are all dark gray on this map. You can see the dark gray swath to the right. That is all along Mount Baldy Road, and that's flat land. That's kind of down out of the hillsides. The other big puddle over on just left of it is Johnson's Pasture. And you can see some other parcels down below and up in corners. Those are areas where homes, large numbers of homes could be built. So the white parcels on that map were all private. Those are all private, still private parcels. So everything that's white there was still privately owned at that time. And now I'm going to talk about how that changed. But let's talk a little more first about this original park. The loop trail is about 5 miles long, and that's the most popular part of our park. And it's almost all in the original striped area that was the original park. And it begins at the top of Mills Avenue. So next slide, please. You can see that it is very popular, and it's popular to people throughout the region. So what I want to talk about is, how did this park happen? How did it come about? Well, it took over 7 years of deliberations with the city and the owner of the land, Pomona College, falling in and out of agreements. And I just want to tell you about one breakthrough meeting, because otherwise this talk would be way too long. 2 Pomona College officials met with city manager Glenn Southard, Mayor Diane Ring, and Councilwoman Judy Wright. And both Judy and Diane were leaguers who had worked on the League of Women Voters Hillside Study and the task force and the development credit idea. The initial assumption going into that meeting was that Pomona owned all this land and Pomona College would develop the cluster area on the flatland along Mount Baldy Road and would move the development credits there and donate the hillside land to a nature conservancy. The city's main concern was to prevent any development up in the hillsides. Well, in the middle of the meeting, suddenly someone, either Judy or Diane, we think, said, "Why don't we buy it?" And there was this long, stunned silence. And everybody who was at that meeting says, "I remember the silence." While everyone sort of turned that idea over in the mind that the city would own all of this instead of Pomona College. And that's what they decided to do. They agreed that the city would buy all the land, sell the cluster to a developer, and retire the development credits on the hillside parcels, turn them over to the developer. So the city started making monthly payments to Pomona College. And in the end, the city paid over $1 million, but after about a year, the financial picture changed and it couldn't afford to continue the monthly payments and it was in danger of defaulting. But thanks to the good relationships that had developed, Pomona agreed to let the city keep the hillside land. And in exchange, the city helped Pomona with the entitlement process, paid for the entitlement process, and helped with a specific plan for the cluster area. And the city gave Pomona the hillside development credits for the cluster area. And that smoothed the way for Pomona to sell it to a developer, so that today this is the Stone Creek neighborhood along Mount Baldy Road. So the vision of the city's negotiators to protect the hillsides led them further. It led them beyond just protecting them to actually creating the original Claremont Hills Wilderness Park in 1997. And still in the 1990s, there were large cluster areas for housing in the hillsides, and Johnson's pasture was the largest and the most vulnerable. By 1999, Johnson's pasture faced a serious threat of development. It's, as Arlene said, it's 180 acres and the cluster area could be developed with as many as 256 homes. So in 2000, three Claremont women formed Claremont Wildlands Conservancy. And from now on, I'm just going to call it CWC to make my talk a little more concise. So to save Johnson's pasture was their goal. Just to save Johnson's pasture, that was the goal. And everyone at that time expected the pasture would be developed. So this was kind of a radical project. One of the women who led the way was Suzanne Thompson, and she was the main leader of CWC for the first 10 years. She and the other founders made the organization a nonprofit, raised money, and recruited members. Crucially, they formed a partnership with the national nonprofit Trust for Public Land, working with its office in Pasadena. Well, the next thing that happened was in October 2003, the Padua fire, which is also called the Grand Prix fire, swept through the foothills on Santa Ana winds. It destroyed 66 homes in Claremont and damaged another 23. Just in Claremont, there was much more damage to the east. But it didn't deter the city, which now had a wilderness park and wanted it to grow. So in 2003 and 2004, the city added 3 more parcels to the park. They were on this map, you can see them with the green arrows: the Noland parcel, Rancho de los Amigos, CMC's parcel, Claremont McKenna College's parcel, and the Wang parcel down to the right, which is next to Sycamore Canyon, which came in 1975. So how did that happen? Well, the city council backed the city manager, Glenn Southard, and Glenn deputized his young assistant, Jim Lewis, who's now the city manager in Pismo Beach, to work with CWC and with the Trust for Public Land to buy up more parcels. Jim and the Trust for Public Land project manager at that time, Brady Moss, went out and negotiated deals with 3 willing sellers and secured state funding for the purchases. By now, the vision of a grand wilderness park over much of the Claremont hillsides had become a reality. The next prize then was Johnson's pasture, and it became part of the park in 2007. And on this map, the blue arrow shows you where Johnson's pasture is, and it shows you how the original park is now filling in. You can see in the next slide why Johnson's pasture is so special. And here are some of those eucalyptus trees that were planted by the Johnson family's friends in the first half of the 1900s. They're not native, but they're flourishing here. C.C. and Louisa Johnson were the original owners and namesakes of the pasture. Arlene spoke to you about them. In 1950, Louisa died, and the land was sold to the Musgrove brothers for $750,000. In 1960, they sold the lower slopes to the developers of Claraboya. And as Arlene said, Johnson's pasture was to be Claraboya 2. And you can see here in the aerial map, Claraboya coming up there with the blue rectangle on top. The blue rectangle is where Johnson's pasture is today, and that would all have been housing. But there was a merciful bankruptcy that prevented Claraboya 2 from happening. Johnson's pasture, as I said earlier, is the only parcel in the park that's paid for directly by Claremont taxpayers. So, almost all of it. There's a little county money, a little college's money, and a little CWC money, but most of it is paid by taxpayers. Success in saving it was the result of 2 intense and very hot political campaigns in 2006. The land was appraised for $12 million. At first, the city council and voters all wanted to save it, but they disagreed on how to pay for it, with a parcel tax or a bond measure. Well, they went out for a campaign in June for a parcel tax, and it failed miserably. The final vote was 56 to 44%. But the opponents, who were very organized, claimed that they favored the purchase. They just didn't like the financing mechanism. So right after the loss, the voters and council members, liberals and conservatives, all came together to buy Johnson's pasture with a general obligation bond, which requires a 2/3 vote to pass, as you know. They put it on the November ballot. CWC and some city council members and many community members organized an all-out campaign called Yes on Measure S. On the committee of 25, 9 were CWC board members. College students made T-shirts that you can see here on the 2 hikers. Supporters posted yard signs. Artists held benefit concerts. CWC circulated brochures like this one. Supporters sent mailers, walked door to door, lobbied at grocery stores, gave talks, wrote letters to the editor, became poll watchers, and drove voters to the polls. College students convinced friends to register to vote in Claremont and to get out and vote. CWC board members made $1,000 pledges. At one point, they delivered a wagon load of letters to the city council, and the result was over 71% voting yes. We saved Johnson's pasture. That in the Courier front page, that's Suzanne Thompson, president of CWC and co-chair of the Yes on Measure S campaign. The 2 secrets of success were that we had no organized opposition. The campaign included everyone. And secondly, Johnson's pasture really is the well-loved crown jewel of the hillsides that the campaign had claimed it was. People just loved it. Well, next in 2010 and 11, Trust for Public Land and CWC worked with the city to acquire Gale Ranch with state grant funding. And you can see Gale Ranch fills in that big hole between the original park and the Wang property and Johnson's pasture. So now you can see this is almost, I'll tell you about one more piece, but this is almost what the park looks like today. So for the Gale Ranch property, 2 state agencies agreed to split the cost of $4.8 million. It's strategically located between Johnson's pasture and the main park entrance over on Mills Avenue. So that made it really valuable to have it be part of the park. And the Gale family that ran the Angora Goat Ranch that Arlene told you about, they had owned it for over 100 years, but they sold it in 1984, and it sold one more time before it became part of the park. Okay, now just shifting gears a little bit. From 2013 until 2016, the city developed its Hillsides Master Plan with a lot of support from CWC. By 2013, the park's popularity had exploded with a little help from Yelp. Estimates were that there were over 320,000 visits a year, and I think that may have gone up to about 500,000 today. Neighbors became concerned about noise, traffic, parking, pedestrian safety, trash. It was becoming a real burden on the neighborhood. The city council expanded the parking lots and added fees, and they responded to parking complaints as they arose by instituting residential permit parking on one street after another. It was a kind of piecemeal approach. So CWC urged the council to create a master plan for overall good management of the park with 3 main goals: preserve the park as an environmental resource, provide passive recreation for park visitors, and minimize the impact on neighbors. After extensive community involvement, the City Council adopted the Hillsides Master Plan in 2016. And the city now has a robust ranger program and a loyal volunteer group of Friends of the Park. Trust for Public Land calls our park one of the best managed parks in the San Gabriels. Okay, now I'll just talk about the final 2 parcels that were donations. Both of them were donations. The first was huge. It was the 463 acres of Evie Canyon, and that was added in 2017. Pomona College saw how well managed and how safe from development the park was, and so it donated the Evie Canyon parcels. You can see almost the whole park today here. The original park in yellow, Evie Canyon in green, and then those tan stripes on the parcels that were added in between. The white areas are still privately owned in that picture. The white blank areas are still privately owned parts of the hillsides. Okay, I just want you to see Evie Canyon. So in these next 3 pictures, just so you can see what a gift Pomona gave to the city with this donation. Okay, finally, in 2020, the Bertolina family donated their 20-acre parcel adjacent to Johnson's pasture on the left there. CWC worked closely with the family and the city, and we even contributed the closing costs to that purchase. And as you can see, this parcel is really important because it's a bridge to the wildland corridor to the west. To sum up, and to remind you, our vision is to have all 3,100 acres of the park added to the 2,500 acres we have now in Claremont, and to connect the park to the parkland, the open space to the west. On this map, you can see Clara Oaks in pink. It helps to extend that bridge to the LA County open space, and the white parcels below and above it are still in private hands. And Terry's going to tell you all about that right now.
Thank you, Lisa. So we're going to focus on what was pink on the prior map. This is a close-up. And the history of this land is that in 2016, Randy Lim, a Canadian developer with investors from China, purchased this 103-acre parcel. He called it Clara Oaks, and he planned 40 to maybe 47 luxury homes. In the spring of 2018, and after 2 years of planning, as well as meeting with the community of Claremont, he called Lissa and suggested that he might be interested in selling the land to the Claremont Wildlands Conservancy. So we immediately enlisted the help of the Trust for Public Land. And one of the necessary steps in an acquisition is to have the land appraised. So the Trust for Public Land in August of 2018 had the property appraised at a value of $7.2 million. Randy agreed that this would at least cover his purchase price and the cost that he had incurred at that point in time. It's important to know that if he were to go through the entire entitlement process, that the value would in essence double to a value of about $15 million. And so there's some urgency to acquire the land at this value as opposed to after it's gained some additional entitlements. So we immediately met with Hilda Solis, who at that time was our county supervisor, and discussed our need for county funds. We also discussed the need for state funds, and it became very clear that $7.2 million was going to be a big challenge. And we've stayed in touch with Randy Lim so that he knows what's going on. And as a result, he decided that he'd better start the environmental impact report process so that he could have a second fallback position if we were not able to acquire and purchase this land from him. He, however, remains willing to sell it, and we remain in touch with him about the progress that we're making. The next few maps are from the Clara Oaks Specific Plan Project initial study. So this entire study is available on the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA site. So you can see the placement of the land in relation to Los Angeles County and San Bernardino County, as well as Claremont. This map, though, gives you a lot more specific information. In blue, you can see that this property includes the headwaters of the San Gabriel River. In fact, this is called the Upper San Jose Creek Sub-Watershed. The black diagonal lines indicate that the property is in a very high fire hazard severity zone. So the CEQA process requires that a large number of agencies look at a particular development and send their opinions about the particular development. And the one that I found most interesting was a letter from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Under the topic fire, they say, the project has a potential to impact open space and natural habitat by increasing fire frequency and severity, as well as requiring fuel modification zones that could result in additional loss of open space and natural habitat beyond the development footprint. And we expect further agencies to comment on the challenges of developing this property. It's interesting to note that in the last 3 fires, all have occurred since 1950, that the Clara Oaks parcel has burned. And in fact, going back even further, the last 5 fires include this same parcel. And you can imagine what it would be like if houses located on these lots were in the middle of a fire. They would need to get out through only one entry point, which is Webb Canyon Road. So I took a drive up Webb Canyon Road to give you a feel for what the road looks like and how it would feel to these 40 to 47 people trying to escape, as well as the other people living on Webb Canyon Road. The first thing you see when you turn from baseline onto Webb Canyon Road is that, yes, indeed, it's in an area of fire danger. Then you see that it's subject to flooding. The next sign says, this is a really narrow road, be careful of oncoming traffic. And then you come upon a very narrow bridge currently located on private property. And then you notice, oh my gosh, what a beautiful road. All these old, lovely oak trees that we in the state of California are trying to preserve. Well, rather than focusing on why the parcel should not be developed, I would like to turn to why it should be preserved. And for me, the most important aspect is that which shown by Professor Paul Faustich's motion activated cameras. So he located these cameras on the Clara Oaks property, and you can see that he captured a really abundant wildlife in action on this very property. And you can even see the bear going down the river during times of wetness, and the cougar, and it's a fantastic property. So these animals are supported by the vegetation and the terrain of Clara Oaks, and the property would become part of the Claremont Hills Wilderness Park. And when you think about the Claremont Hills Wilderness Park, it hosts a wide variety of human animals from all over this region. And in fact, Lissa talked about the master plan. During that time, a survey was done just to find out where is everyone coming from. And in fact, look at all the locations from which people come to enjoy this natural park. And if the park were larger, it would allow more and more people to spread out and enjoy nature. And we have plans to outreach to youth so that young people growing up have an opportunity to know and connect with nature, and they will become the future supporters of open space and wilderness. In fact, over 80% of the visitors come from outside of Claremont. This is not a Claremont park. This is a regional park. And in many cases, it's serving many park poor communities in our area and many communities that are considered to be disadvantaged. So it really comes down to fundraising and working hard to figure out where we can get grants to acquire enough money to buy this property so that we can protect the headwaters, we can protect that lovely wilderness corridor that Lissa pointed out, we can preserve the native vegetation and the native wildlife, and expand the park, and of course, preserve the land from development. So we continue to engage with the Trust for Public Land, and their expertise is really in submitting grant applications to both state and county agencies, and to negotiating with property owners so that they get what they need out of a deal while preserving the land and allowing it to remain open space. All of these county and state agencies want to know how the community feels. Is the community really supporting this, or is this just a few people that are trying to get this done? So it's really important to gather community support and to be sure that the granting agencies know that the City of Claremont is willing to include this as part of the park, manage it as one of the best managed parks in the San Gabriel Valley. And in fact, the City of Claremont is willing to do that. And they in fact have allocated $300,000 recently to park expansion. But I think what's even more important is our community has really stepped up to show support. So we put a brochure in our local newspaper, the Courier, and you can see an example of that brochure. We also have just volunteers that are willing to print a poster and stand at the opening or the entrance gate to the Wilderness Park and just generate knowledge and interest in the support that we need to show these granting agencies through the donation of community dollars. And we even have a spontaneously generated retail window display showing a wide variety of animals that would benefit from the retention of open space. We also have a t-shirt that was designed by a community member and donated to this effort to be given to people who donate $50 or more. So at a very visceral level, we have community support with people using their own creativity to prove that they're in favor of retaining Clara Oaks as open space. Well, here's where we are. The Claremont Wildlands Conservancy pledged the bulk of our funds. And we said we would pledge $75,000 to be given at the time of escrow closure when the property was closed. And we challenged the community to pledge or donate a similar amount. And in fact, between September and January, we have gathered more than we had challenged. We're now at $189,619. And we can show the granting agencies that our entire community supports this purchase, supports park expansion, and preservation of open space. But we're not done. The Trust for Public Land, the Claremont Wildlands Conservancy, and all of those who support this effort will continue to work diligently to gain the funds through all channels necessary to purchase the Claro Oaks property. And we all look forward to seeing you at the ribbon cutting when we finally acquire this land. Thank you. And now we're open to questions.
Wow, thank you so much. I feel like I've learned just a ton from that, and am now so much more appreciative of what we have right here in our backyard. I, at the moment, don't see any questions, but I'll give that a second if people are typing. And I'll also take a little point of privilege to just say what I have to say about my experiences with the Wilderness Park. You know, I have a family here in Claremont, little kids, and a husband that grew up in South Central LA, and he grew up in a place that is, you know, very low resource area and not tree dense and park dense like we have here in Claremont. And his favorite thing is that we live so close to parks, but also especially the Wilderness Park. And I love that we have this area and this resource that is so close, and that it's a place for a region, and that people are able to come and utilize it, and that it is something that is there for the wilderness. Should be there for everyone. Everyone should be able to go and have quiet moments. It's good for the soul. So I really appreciate the time and the work you do. When I was on the Community and Human Services Commission, we got to get reports from the Friends of the Wilderness Park and the work that they do, and that's pretty great. You can volunteer. Everybody out there, you can go and volunteer for the Friends of the Wilderness Park, and they do great work there. You get a t-shirt if you volunteer enough times with them.
Yeah, it's a really great organization, and it doesn't matter whether you're interested in greeting people and helping them find their way around the park, picking up trash, maybe helping with trail maintenance. You can also do mapping of plants. If you're interested in natural plants or invasive plants, you can do some plant mapping. There are all sorts of opportunities to help with the park through the Friends of the Wilderness Park.
Great. We do have a couple of questions coming in, so we'll get that going. First, let's see, what public grants are you pursuing?
That's a good question for Lissa.
Is that my question? Okay.
Yes.
We have 3 grants in right now that we wrote. Actually, Trust for Public Land, the Trust for Public Land grant writer who was hired by Trust for Public Land, wrote them. We worked very closely with her on them. And because we know the details that she doesn't know about the area, and she knows the technicalities of how to write these land use grants that we don't have. So it's a great partnership. One is to the Regional Rivers and Mountains Conservancy. It's called the San Gabriel and Lower Los Angeles Rivers and Mountains Conservancy, based in Azusa. And another one is the California Natural Resources Agency. And what happens is when voters vote for propositions, when we voted, the last big one we did was Prop 68. When we vote for propositions, the money goes to the state. And then the propositions that support open space, preserving watershed, parkland, those monies then are distributed to these conservancies and agencies, which then give grants, put out calls for grant proposals, receive the proposals, and select whom they're going to give grants to. And so we have 2 state agencies that we've applied to, and one more, the county of, back in 2017, we voters passed a proposition called Measure A, which is an LA County proposition. And so it went into the courts. It just became available. The first time we could apply for a grant was last October. We got our grant in, and we won't hear until later in the spring. But the 2 state grants that we applied for, we're going to hear from one of them next week. We submitted a proposal for 3 million, and we submitted a proposal for 1 million to the other one, and we should hear from that by the end of January. And then the county one, we submitted a proposal for 1 million, and we'll hear from that a little later in the spring. And then we'll start negotiating, and we'll go out for the rest of the money. But we're well on our way. Well, we haven't got it yet, but we're well on our way to applying for those funds.
And if you're interested in following where we are with these processes, you can go to ClaremontWildlands.org. And we keep updating the status of this campaign and the status of what's going on that website. You can also ask to become a member of our mailing list, and you'll get more information that way. And that's also the same location that you can use for making a donation.
We had a hand raised. If you'd like to ask your question, Milka. We'll give you a moment if you'd like to. And while we're waiting for that, I've got a question over here. Can you share the current financial situation and prognosis for purchasing Clara Oaks? So would more from the community help? So.
Yeah, the more we have from the community, the more we can convince granting agencies that we truly have community support. That's probably one of the most important things. And so, yes, we do need more, and we may need to be able to call on people to say, write letters to legislators, write letters to granting agencies. But at the moment, really the most impactful thing is that really hard-earned dollar that for an individual is worth a lot more than the state thousands of dollars. $1 from a community member is worth a lot more because it says something about the heartfelt passion and support from the community.
I'd like to add that the fact that the city has had financial difficulties made them unable to do the kind of match that a lot of these grants require a substantial amount from the local government. And that we because of all the difficulties that we've had financially, we haven't been able to get a promise of any substantial amount. So the local donations, the donations from our support really help to balance that problem.
Right. Claremont has 3 real problems when it goes out for these grants, because we're competing with other communities and with other very worthy grants. So grant proposals. So the first is that we're not poor. We're not a poor community. We're not low income. The second is that we're not park poor. And the third is that we don't have a local match. So this local campaign, as Arlene is saying, that we're doing right now, is because the city hasn't been able to provide that local match because of its financial challenges. This is crucial. And going to our website, you can read more about Clara Oaks. You can look at more pictures, and you can get a lot of information about how to donate. You can donate online, you can donate by mail, and that's all on our website, ClaremontWildlands.org, but if you just put in Claremont Wildlands Conservancy, it'll come up.
It's in the chat. I think Sorrel put it in the chat. I put it in the chat.
Ah, there it is.
The other thing is, someone asked how many families and people have donated. We have over 300 people have donated. It's really quite, I'm having trouble getting all the names listed on the website because we have so many different people, which is a really nice problem to have. So that's been great. I think one of the questions was, what's our vision for bringing youth to the park? And unfortunately, COVID has put an end to some of our efforts, but we've been working with a variety of organizations, particularly in Pomona, for youth that don't have an opportunity, many who've never spent the night overnight in the outdoors, to use Las Casitas, the Girl Scout house, to provide opportunities for youth to come up and be told about, bring water with you. If hear the nice, you'll see tarantulas and you'll see rattlesnakes, and they're not dangerous. This is how you cohabitate with them. And here's what you do as a land steward, and look at the stars. And we unfortunately had to put a lot of that effort on hold due to COVID. But as soon as this is over, which I think will eventually happen, we'll be able to start working again with youth all over our region so that they become supporters of the wildlands and the wilderness and enjoy the pleasures of nature.
All right, we had another raised hand. If you'd like to ask your question, Jennifer.
Yes, thank you. And not just a question, I want to acknowledge the incredible quality and amount of effort from both the League and the Wildlands Conservancy for decades as a longtime resident. I've been witness to each of these campaigns, and it makes my heart sing to have that be part of the culture of Claremont. And I do think it's the most inclusive thing we do, to involve people in such detailed and stalwart and intelligent effort that you've made. And I really want that to be acknowledged, both the League and the Conservancy. And I hope that as we're doing the priority setting for the city, that part of our heritage is honored and preserved. And it's a way to bring together all the people who want every kind of sustainability and every kind of inclusionary policies for everybody who lives in our city or who might in future. So I couldn't put that into the chat. I wanted to just give you that. And in terms of a question, I think it's important for everybody to recognize that nothing can turn this into just the city can take it because it's in a fire zone. And so all of what I'd like you to speak to is just some of the details of that given that it has to be purchased, how is it beneficial that we are doing a revision of the housing element and the safety element that both can show that this is a high fire area that should preclude housing, but we still have to buy the land. And also, I'm curious about other cities, residents from other cities or other city governments, given that there's such a high proportion of the users are from local cities that do have poor areas that in terms of lack of parks or needs of the community, and whether they're being enlisted to donate for the purchase.
I think Arlene's probably better skilled at talking about regulations and city plans and fire hazard zones and elements. What I can say is we have reached out to leadership in other cities for support, and we've gotten very strong support from Pomona. And in terms of even meeting with us on the land, with legislators, with the Conservancy, we have a little bit of a challenge because the counties don't work together very much. So Los Angeles County tends to be quite separate in terms of funding, and we're in Los Angeles County. And if we go to San Bernardino County and say we'd really like some of your funds, it doesn't fly very far.
And then I really don't have anything profound to say about the fact it's in a high fire zone. It's been in a high, I think it's level 4 or something, the highest for a long time. But as comments come in from from state agencies about the fact that it's in a high fire zone that may, to some degree, you know, the house, the plans for the houses. I mean, there's a water tank that's part of this development that would be utilized in a fire. I mean, it doesn't take away, as far as I know, or to this point, the rights to, it's in a cluster zone that was intended to be developed. And if it can meet all the regulations, then the houses can be built. So I don't know if anybody else has anything more to say about that.
I'll just add one point, which is we had hoped that LA County Fire would require a second exit, which would be very difficult for the developer to pencil out the project. But so far, LA County Fire is saying that it's okay if 40 some homes are added to the, I've forgotten the number there now, but it's like 30, no.
With
20,
the number of credits that they have?
No, the number of houses, the number of households already there on Webb Canyon Road, it's like 20 some, it's under 75. And if the number is over 75, they would have to build a second exit, but it isn't. And so far, County Fire is allowing this development by not saying they have to have a second exit. If you drive Webb Canyon Road and think about trying to exit that road in the event of a fire, especially if the fire comes in low, comes in south, you can see there's real peril there.
Really?
But this may change. I mean, the negotiations with the county are still going on.
Yes, and at the state level, I mean, there's conversations all over the state because this is a problem all over the state. And can there be some sort of mechanism, some sort of fund that would buy out these properties that are subject to, that are in a high fire zone? You know, maybe that would be the course to follow. But right now, not much has changed from the past regulations. Yeah.
Right, we have a few more questions. Do you have any advice? This one's fun. Do you have any advice for someone going there to hike for the very first time?
It's private land.
Well, I think maybe the wilderness park in general.
Oh, you mean the park?
Yeah, the park.
Sure.
Oh, ask one of us to go with you. No, the advice is bring water and take your time and really enjoy every little viewpoint, because there are hundreds of them that are absolutely wonderful. And I would say park, enter at Mills and do the loop.
The loop is 5 miles, so you can do part of the loop.
Yeah. Anyway, it's wonderful. Do it. And then as soon as Clara Oaks is open, we'll show you some wonderful trails.
There'll be a new western entrance, right?
And then look at the photos on the website to get some ideas.
I would suggest not a holiday, not a weekend.
And take them out.
That would be my suggestion. Thank you. Okay. Measure A county parks measure is generating significant funds. Has the county identified any commitment towards acquiring Clara Oaks? I think maybe we kind of answered that with the previous.
The problem is that only 3% of those funds are for acquisitions.
Yeah.
That should not have happened. We donated $1,000 to the Measure A campaign. We fought for it. We wrote letters to the editor for it. We helped pass it. And we were very dismayed that only 3% of the funding is for acquisitions. So it's going to be hard getting those funds.
The next question we have is about parking at the new parcel. And if I might, I know that this parcel is kind of interior, and just knowing something about parking and the way that that works, I'm going to go with a no, because that is something that the city has to do. And parking's the whole thing, because if you build it, people bring their cars, and on a sustainability thing.
And I think it's important to know that once the land is acquired, it is adjacent to the park and you can access it through the existing park using the existing parking. But the whole concept of what you do with the parcel, how it's utilized, et cetera, is open. And I think that's a really nice opportunity for youth, for people from all over the region, for our community, for our city to all come together and decide, what are we going to do with this parcel? But right now we just need to get it so we can get to the point where we can talk about what to do with it.
What kind of, what kind of programming could happen on the site? Restoring wildlife habitat, nature walks, or even a nature center?
That goes with what I said before. Let's get it and then talk about what it could be. And we have had some wonderful walks through the area with Naomi Fraga, who is, a really renowned botanist. And, there are some really interesting, but unfortunately no endangered species on that property. But it's a great place to look at nature. And then of course the wildlife. So there's all sorts of opportunity. We just need to get it so we can explore it.
And as Terry said, the trails do connect to the park, the rest of the park. So it's, and there could be more trail on that land up high. It would be it's steep. It would be very good, rigorous hiking for people who are fit.
Before I get to the next question, which so far is the last one, I love this comment. I saw downtown LA and Catalina from the loop on the trail on Tuesday, which is great. It's because of this good weather we've had, because for a while the air quality was pretty dodgy and now we're having some lovely clear skies and it's a great view up there. So glad you got to enjoy that. Lastly, are other Claremont community groups actively engaged in your efforts?
Well, you are the first that we've given this presentation to. So thank you for the opportunity. And we're going to be trying to engage other groups over the course of the next several months, both to educate about the history of the park, as well as about Clara Oaks, but also about Claremont Wildlands Conservancy, the Friends of the Wilderness Loop, all these activities that not everybody knows about. So in fact, if you are a member of another group that would like to have a presentation, let us know and we'll see what we can do.
I'd like to say too that officially, no, we are not working with another organization in an official capacity as CWC. But personally and individually, we have a lot of interconnections. Terry was on the Claremont Heritage Board. So was Arlene. We have good connections to Claremont Heritage. Personally, we know people. So I'm on Sustainable Claremont. I'm trying to think what the League, we had meetings with the League a few years ago when we first started working on this, and we got support from, we've gotten letters from you that are support letters for the grants we've written. And we've gotten support for Rivers and Mountains Conservancy grant. We had 15 support letters, a couple from legislators. The rest were from the Sierra Club, the Audubon League, Heritage, Sustainable Claremont. So when we go out for grants, we get support from other organizations. And personally, we have really good connections with these other organizations. For example, the new project manager, new-ish, I think it's been a year and a half now, Trust for Public Land project manager who's working closely with us on this is Claremonter Hugh Cox, whom we connected with through Sustainable Claremont. And there was a job opening at Trust for Public Land. We recommended him for the job. He got it. And he is now our project manager managing Clara Oaks project from that organization. So I think a lot of it is sort of informal connections.
Thank you so much. That is all of the questions that have come through, and we've run a good meeting up to 3:20. So really robust conversation that I think everybody appreciated. Just to say one last thing, with our programming for the year, this went a little bit out of bounds of what we had, but our housing and homelessness topic had a side of environmental on it. And I think what we talked about today really hit on that when we're talking about housing, we need to really be specific about putting the right housing in the right places. And we do ourselves a disservice when we put housing in the wrong places. Housing needs to be built. We need to build a lot of it, and we need to build it where it needs to go. And when we put housing in the hillsides, and when we put it out into natural places, when we build it out into open spaces, when we build it out into the deserts, it does us a disservice. It makes it so we're taking natural resources away, and it makes our environment less safe for all of us. And I think that really hit in to our program emphasis for the year. So I would like to give a really big thank you to Lissa and to Arlene and to Terry for joining us today and to give us a lot of great information and a lot to think about today. I look forward to supporting them and the Wildlands Conservancy in this really great work. And thank you all for joining us.
Thank
Good
you all.
afternoon. Have a great Sunday.
See
Yes.
you on the trails.